Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in their car on an empty road, convinced they're alone. They're not. Someone else is watching from the darkness, studying their vehicle, calculating their vulnerability, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And the terrifying truth is that the person in that car has no idea they've already been selected as a target. They don't know that every decision they're about to make in the next 60 seconds will determine whether they survive the night or become another unsolved mystery on a forgotten stretch of highway. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a collection of scary stories. This is a deep examination of the psychology behind roadside predation, the patterns that emerge when isolation meets opportunity, and the invisible signals that mark certain drivers as targets while others pass through the same dangerous corridors completely unnoticed. Over the next hour, we're going to explore something that highway patrol officers, criminal psychologists, and survival experts understand, but that most drivers never learn until it's far too late. We're going to dissect real encounters that follow disturbingly similar patterns, analyze the predatory behaviors that occur on rural roads and highways, and most importantly, understand the psychology that determines who becomes a victim and who doesn't. The stories you're about to hear share elements that aren't coincidental. Isolated roads, late night hours, visible vulnerability, mechanical failures that seem impossible, and a specific pattern of escalation that follows predictable psychological progression. Some of these encounters involve human predators using sophisticated tactics to trap and victimize drivers. Others involve phenomena that defy rational explanation entirely, leaving even experienced investigators without answers. Understanding both types of threats, the explainable and the unexplainable, is critical for anyone who drives alone at night, who travels rural highways, or who has ever felt that primal instinct that something is deeply wrong. Part 1. The psychology of roadside predation. Let's start with the most fundamental truth about roadside attacks and highway predation. They're not random. Criminals who target drivers on isolated roads engage in sophisticated victim selection processes that are far more calculated than most people realize. Understanding how roadside predators choose their targets is the first step toward ensuring you're never selected. The roadside predation process begins with what law enforcement calls environmental exploitation. Criminals who operate on rural highways and back roads aren't randomly hopping to encounter vulnerable drivers. They're strategically positioning themselves in locations where isolation is guaranteed, where help is distant, where escape routes are limited, and where the psychological advantage belongs entirely to the attacker. These locations are chosen based on specific criteria that maximize the predator's success while minimizing their risk of capture. The first category of exploitation involves geographic isolation. Criminals seek out stretches of road where there are no witnesses for miles, where cell phone service is unreliable or non-existent, where law enforcement response times are measured in hours rather than minutes, and where the surrounding terrain provides concealment for both the attack and the attacker's escape. Desert highways that cut through vast uninhabited regions, mountain passes with limited visibility and no alternate routes, rural back roads that wind through dense forest or farmland with no nearby residences. These aren't just lonely places. They're tactical environments that criminals deliberately choose because the geography itself becomes a weapon against any driver who passes through. But geographic isolation alone doesn't create a predation opportunity. The second category involves temporal isolation, the specific times when vulnerable drivers are most likely to be traveling these isolated routes without the protection that comes from traffic density and witnesses. Late night hours between midnight and 4 in the morning, when legitimate traffic is minimal. The hours immediately after bars close when impaired drivers are navigating home. Early morning hours before dawn when long-haul truckers are rushing to make delivery schedules. Weather conditions that reduce visibility and create natural cover for predatory activity. Criminals operating on rural highways understand these temporal patterns intimately because they've studied them, sometimes for years, learning exactly when their hunting grounds will provide optimal conditions. The third category, and this is where it becomes truly disturbing, involves engineered vulnerability. Sophisticated roadside predators don't just wait for random opportunities. They create them through deliberate manipulation of the environment and the target's circumstances. The shopping cart placed strategically in the middle of a dark back road isn't debris or an accident. It's bait designed to force a driver to stop, to exit their vehicle, to create a moment of vulnerability where the attack can occur. The stranded vehicle on the shoulder with hazard lights flashing and a person waving for help isn't always a genuine emergency. Sometimes it's a staged scenario designed to trigger the Good Samaritan instinct and lure victims into stopping in locations where they're completely isolated and defenseless. These engineered vulnerability tactics exploit fundamental human psychology. We're conditioned to help people in distress. We're trained from childhood to stop for obstacles in the road. We feel compelled to investigate unusual situations even when something feels slightly wrong. Roadside predators understand these psychological drives and weaponize them. The person flagging you down isn't asking for help with a flat tire. They're assessing whether you're alone, whether you appear physically capable of resistance, whether your vehicle has security features or weapons visible, and whether you're displaying the kind of awareness that suggests you recognize the danger. All of this assessment happens in seconds, and your response determines whether you're allowed to continue safely or whether you've just been selected. The fourth category involves signal detection and target assessment. Experienced roadside predators have developed an almost unconscious ability to identify vulnerable drivers based on subtle signals that most people don't even realize they're broadcasting. A single occupant vehicle traveling at unusual hours. A driver who appears tired, distracted, or impaired based on their driving patterns. Vehicles that are older or less maintained, suggesting the driver may have limited resources or capability. Out-of-state license plates indicating the driver is unfamiliar with the area and less likely to know safe routes or where to seek help. Vehicles that pull over frequently suggesting the driver is lost or having mechanical issues. Female drivers traveling alone, not because women are actually more vulnerable, but because many predators operate under the assumption that they are and specifically target based on gender. What makes signal detection so dangerous is that it happens unconsciously for both the predator and the prey. The predator has internalized these assessment criteria through experience and pattern recognition. They can evaluate a potential target almost instantly based on hundreds of microsignals. Meanwhile, the driver has no idea they're being assessed. They don't realize that choosing to pull over at a certain location, that displaying confusion about directions, that traveling alone at a certain hour has marked them as someone worth following, worth tracking, worth attacking. The rational choice theory in criminal psychology explains this selection process. Criminals make calculated decisions based on assessment of reward versus risk. A tired driver alone on an isolated road in an older vehicle with out-of-state plates represents high reward and low risk. High reward because they may have valuables, because attacking them provides the psychological gratification that many predators seek, because they're unlikely to be missed immediately if something goes wrong. Low risk because they're isolated, because they're unlikely to have support nearby, because they probably don't know the area well enough to escape effectively, because by the time law enforcement responds, the predator will be long gone. The most sophisticated roadside predators are the ones who have perfected this selection process. They're not attacking every vehicle that passes through their territory. They're watching dozens or hundreds of vehicles, eliminating those that present too much risk, that show signs of awareness and capability, that are traveling in groups or maintaining communication with others, that have visible security measures suggesting the driver is prepared for trouble, They're waiting patiently for that one perfect target who checks all the boxes. Isolated, vulnerable, unaware, and accessible. Here's where understanding roadside predation becomes practically useful. The same driver can present entirely differently based on relatively minor changes in behavior, awareness, and preparation. A driver who appears to be an easy target can transform into someone the predator decides to let pass by through strategic changes in how they conduct themselves on isolated roads. This isn't about becoming paranoid or never driving alone. It's about understanding what signals you're currently sending and making conscious choices about what you want to communicate to anyone who might be watching and assessing. The psychology of deterrence works by changing the predator's risk calculation. You're not trying to become invulnerable. That's impossible. You're trying to present yourself as higher risk and lower reward than the alternative targets who will pass through the same corridor. You're trying to be the driver the predator unconsciously eliminates from consideration because something about your behavior, your vehicle, your level of awareness suggests that attacking you will be more difficult and more dangerous than waiting for someone else. Part 2. The pattern of encounter escalation. Once a roadside predator has identified and selected a target, the encounter almost always follows a predictable pattern of escalation. Understanding this pattern is critical because it provides opportunities for escape at each stage, before the situation reaches the point where physical confrontation becomes inevitable. The escalation pattern exists because predators, whether they're criminals or something else entirely, are testing your responses, assessing your awareness, and building confidence that they can act without consequences. The first stage of roadside encounter escalation is what security professionals call presence establishment and initial contact. This is when the predator makes themselves visible to you or creates a situation that brings them into your awareness, but in a way that's ambiguous enough to maintain plausible deniability. A vehicle that begins following you on an isolated highway maintaining distance, but matching your speed changes exactly. A stranded motorist who appears to need help, positioned at a location where stopping would put you at tactical disadvantage. An obstacle in the road that forces you to slow down or stop, placed where the predator can observe your response from concealment. A figure visible in your mirrors or headlights who shouldn't be there, whose presence seems inexplicable given the isolated location. The psychological purpose of this initial contact is twofold. First, it allows the predator to gauge your awareness and responsiveness. Do you notice that you're being followed? Do you recognize that something about the situation is wrong? Do you take defensive action immediately, or do you rationalize and dismiss your concerns? Second, it allows them to assess your capability and likely resistance. Are you alone or are there passengers? Does your vehicle suggest resources and capability or vulnerability? Do your actions suggest someone who will fight back effectively or someone who will freeze or comply? Your response during this initial contact stage is absolutely critical in determining whether the encounter escalates or whether the predator decides to abandon you as a target. A strong, immediate response that demonstrates awareness often causes predators to break off entirely, refusing to stop for obstacles or stranded motorists on isolated roads, and instead calling for help from a safe distance, accelerating and creating distance from vehicles that are following you rather than maintaining speed, immediately altering your route when you recognize surveillance. These responses signal that you're not the easy target the predator was looking for. A weak response or no response encourages escalation, stopping to investigate obstacles without assessing the tactical situation, pulling over to help stranded motorists without considering whether the scenario could be staged, continuing on your route while being followed without taking defensive action, convincing yourself that nothing is wrong despite clear signals that something is very wrong. These responses signal vulnerability and lack of awareness, which is exactly what roadside predators are looking for. The second stage of escalation is active surveillance and intelligence gathering. Once the predator has determined through initial contact that you're a viable target, they begin gathering detailed information about you while maneuvering you into a position where the actual attack can occur with maximum effectiveness and minimum risk to themselves. For the vehicle that's following you, this means maintaining pursuit while observing your patterns. Do you check your mirrors frequently? Do you vary your speed to test whether they're actually following you? Do you attempt to evade or call for help? Are there opportunities to force you off the road or corner you in a location with no escape routes? This surveillance phase often involves what psychologists call normalization and desensitization. The predator maintains their presence in a way that gradually becomes part of your reality rather than triggering continued alarm. The vehicle following you stays back far enough that you start to rationalize their presence. Maybe they're just going the same direction. Maybe they're nervous about passing a truck. Maybe it's nothing. This rationalization is exactly what the predator wants, because it keeps you from taking decisive defensive action during the critical window when escape is still easy. For engineered scenarios like staged obstacles or fake emergencies, the surveillance phase involves the predator observing you from concealment as you approach and react. They're assessing whether you're alone, whether you appear physically capable, whether you're armed or have visible security measures, whether you're on the phone with someone who would know something is wrong if the call suddenly disconnects. They're gathering intelligence that will determine exactly how they execute the attack and what level of force they'll need to use to overcome any resistance. The third stage of escalation is tactical positioning and opportunity creation. Once the predator has gathered sufficient intelligence and assessed that you're unlikely to mount effective resistance, they begin maneuvering you or themselves into position for the actual attack. The vehicle that's been following you suddenly accelerates and attempts to force you off the road or box you in. The staged emergency suddenly becomes more urgent or desperate, with the person flagging you down moving into the road or approaching your vehicle while you're stopped. The obstacle that forced you to stop suddenly has people emerging from concealment moving toward your vehicle. This positioning phase is when the predator transitions from ambiguous behavior that could be explained away to overtly threatening behavior that makes their intentions clear. It's also the last moment when escape through vehicle mobility is reliably possible. Once you're boxed in, once your vehicle is disabled, once you're surrounded or cornered, your options narrow dramatically. Understanding that this transition is coming, that the surveillance and intelligence phase will inevitably lead to tactical positioning, means you should be taking defensive action during the earlier stages, rather than waiting to see if the situation resolves on its own. The fourth stage, and this is where encounters become acutely dangerous, is the attack itself or the completion of the predator's objective. This is when they attempt to gain control of you or your vehicle through force or the credible threat of force. Forced vehicle stops where they use their vehicle to disable yours or block your escape. Approach while you're stopped or disabled where they come to your windows or doors attempting to force entry. Weapons deployment where they display or threaten with firearms or other weapons to compel compliance. Physical assault if they're able to get you out of your vehicle or breach your vehicle's security. The transition to this stage isn't random. It typically occurs when the predator has assessed that your resistance will be minimal, that the window of opportunity is optimal with no witnesses or help nearby, that they've adequately prepared and positioned themselves for maximum tactical advantage, and that the risks are acceptable given the expected reward, whether that reward is financial, psychological, or something else entirely. Understanding this four-stage escalation pattern has profound practical implications. First, recognizing that you're in the initial contact stage allows you to take defensive action before the situation progresses. Most drivers make the mistake of not responding to early warning signs because they seem ambiguous or because they don't want to seem paranoid. But decisive action during stage 1 is your most effective tool for preventing stages 2, 3, and 4. Second, understanding that surveillance and normalization precedes attack means you shouldn't wait for behavior to become overtly threatening before taking protective action. By the time tactical positioning begins, your window for easy escape has already closed. Third, recognizing the pattern allows you to trust your instincts even when you can't rationally explain why something feels wrong. If a situation is following this escalation curve, your concern is justified regardless of whether any specific element seems threatening in isolation. The pattern is the threat, not necessarily each individual incident. Fourth, understanding escalation helps you avoid the psychological traps that roadside predators rely on, particularly the normalization and rationalization that keeps you from acting decisively when you still have options. Part 3. Engineered failures and impossible circumstances. Now we need to address something that law enforcement and security experts struggle to explain. A subset of roadside encounters that involve circumstances that shouldn't be possible according to our understanding of how vehicles, technology, and physical reality work. Engine failures that occur without mechanical cause. Electronic systems that die simultaneously and completely. Physical phenomena that contradict basic physics. These impossible circumstances appear repeatedly in certain types of roadside encounters. And while they defy rational explanation, understanding their patterns may provide insights into recognition and response. The most commonly reported impossible circumstance involves simultaneous total system failure. A vehicle's engine dies completely, while the driver is certain they didn't touch the ignition or key. The vehicle's electrical systems go dark, including dashboard lights, headlights, and interior systems, despite the battery being functional moments before. The driver's mobile phone dies completely despite having significant battery charge immediately prior. All of these failures happen simultaneously or in rapid succession, typically in proximity to some unusual phenomenon or presence. From an engineering perspective, these simultaneous failures shouldn't occur. Modern vehicles have multiple independent electrical systems that don't fail simultaneously without massive physical damage or electromagnetic interference far beyond what natural sources produce. Mobile phones have independent power systems that don't fail in correlation with vehicle systems. Yet these reports appear consistently enough, from credible witnesses including law enforcement officers and professional drivers, that dismissing them entirely becomes difficult. The second category of impossible circumstances involves physics violations related to light and energy. Lights, or luminous phenomena that move in ways that contradict inertia, acceleration limits, or other physical constraints. Lights that appear to match the speed of a moving vehicle perfectly despite being some distance away, maintaining exact positional relationship regardless of the vehicle's speed changes. Lights that intensify or dim in correlation with human perception or attention, almost as if responsive to consciousness. Lights that produce effects on electronic systems without any plausible mechanism for such interaction. Skeptics rightfully point out that distance perception in darkness is notoriously unreliable, that lights can appear to maintain position due to optical illusions and parallax effects, that human memory of such events is influenced by fear and stress. All of these objections are valid. Yet the consistency of these reports, the similarity in details across witnesses who have no connection to each other, and the correlation with unexplained system failures suggests something beyond simple misperception may be occurring in at least some cases. The third category involves temporal anomalies and missing time. Drivers report arriving at destinations much later or earlier than should be possible given their speed and distance traveled. Gaps in memory where they can't account for periods of travel time despite being conscious and driving throughout. Clocks and timekeeping, devices showing times that don't match between vehicle, phone, and other sources. These temporal discrepancies are particularly disturbing because they suggest either massive gaps in conscious awareness or some kind of temporal distortion that we have no framework for understanding. From a neurological perspective, dissociative states caused by extreme stress can create altered time perception and memory gaps. Highway hypnosis, a trance-like state that can occur during long, monotonous drives, can create similar effects. Yet some of the reported temporal anomalies go far beyond what these explanations can account for, involving physical impossibilities like traveling distances that would require speeds the vehicle isn't capable of, or arriving at destinations before leaving the origin point, according to witness testimony. The fourth category, and this one is perhaps most disturbing, involves coordinated failures that seem responsive to human action or intention. Engines that won't start multiple times, but then start normally the moment the unusual presence disappears. Electronic systems that fail when the witness attempts to document or call for help, but function normally otherwise. Failures that occur at moments of maximum vulnerability or isolation, as if timed for maximum effect. The appearance of the phenomenon itself seeming to trigger or cause the technological failures in ways that suggest purpose rather than coincidence. If we approach this from a purely rational perspective, confirmation bias and pattern recognition errors could explain why failures seem coordinated. We remember the times when the engine wouldn't start at a scary moment, but forget the random times it failed for normal reasons. We notice failures during unusual encounters, but not during ordinary drives. Our brains are wired to find patterns and assign intention even to random events. All of this is true. Yet the witnesses reporting these coordinated failures often include people with technical expertise, professional drivers who understand vehicle systems intimately, and law enforcement officers trained in observation and reporting. Dismissing all such reports as misperception or false memory becomes increasingly difficult. So how do we make practical sense of impossible circumstances when they seem to defy explanation? First, we acknowledge that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and individual anecdotal accounts, no matter how credible the witness, don't constitute scientific proof of anything beyond the fact that something unusual was experienced. Second, we recognize that some encounters may involve deliberate technological interference by human predators using devices specifically designed to disable vehicles and communications. Such technology exists, is illegal for civilian possession in most jurisdictions, but is available to sophisticated criminal organizations and is used in some roadside attacks. Third, we remain open to the possibility that some phenomena exist which we don't yet have frameworks for understanding. The history of science is filled with observations that were initially dismissed as impossible until the underlying mechanisms were discovered. Electromagnetic phenomena, radiation, quantum effects all seem to violate understood physics until the physics expanded to accommodate them. Whatever is causing these impossible circumstances may eventually have rational explanations that simply aren't available to us yet. Fourth, and most importantly for practical purposes, we recognize that whether the cause is human predators using technology, natural phenomena we don't understand, or something else entirely, the patterns of these encounters provide actionable information for recognition and response. If simultaneous system failures occur in proximity to unusual phenomena, treating it as a genuine emergency and taking defensive action is appropriate regardless of the underlying cause. If circumstances seem to violate possibility, trusting that assessment and prioritizing escape over investigation is the correct response. The key insight is that you don't need to understand what's happening in order to recognize that something dangerous is occurring and that immediate defensive action is required. Your vehicle dying completely for no mechanical reason, while something unusual is visible nearby, doesn't need an explanation. It needs a response. Attempting to restart the vehicle is fine, But if it fails twice, you should be preparing alternative defensive measures rather than continuing to turn the key. Your phone dying at the exact moment you try to call for help during an unusual encounter could be coincidence, but treating it as deliberate interference and acting accordingly might save your life. Part 4. Recognition patterns and warning signs. Let's examine the specific patterns and warning signs that appear consistently across dangerous roadside encounters, whether they involve human predators or unexplained phenomena. Understanding these recognition patterns helps you identify developing threats early enough to take defensive action while escape is still straightforward. The first major warning pattern is behavioral synchronization that seems impossible or unlikely. A vehicle that matches your speed changes exactly despite maintaining distance. A phenomenon that appears to pace your vehicle despite being some distance away. A situation where every defensive action you take is immediately countered, as if your intentions are being anticipated. This synchronization suggests active attention and intent rather than coincidence. Normal traffic patterns involve natural variation. Vehicles pass each other or fall behind based on different speeds and routes. When something maintains perfect synchronization despite your attempts to vary pace or direction, that's a clear signal of purposeful tracking. The second warning pattern is staged scenarios that create forced choices between bad options. An obstacle in the road that's positioned where stopping would put you in tactical disadvantage, but continuing would cause vehicle damage. A stranded motorist positioned where helping requires pulling off in an isolated location with no visibility or witnesses. A situation that seems to present a moral imperative to stop or help, but where every element of the scenario favors a potential attacker. These staged scenarios exploit moral psychology and social conditioning. We're taught to help people in need, to stop for obstacles, to be good Samaritans. Predators understand this and deliberately create situations that trigger these moral impulses while simultaneously putting you at maximum vulnerability. Recognizing a staged scenario requires looking at context and consistency. Does the situation make sense given the location and circumstances? Is the stranded motorist positioned in a way that legitimate mechanical failure would be unlikely to cause? Are there elements of the scenario that seem too perfectly designed to force you to stop? Is your gut instinct screaming that something is wrong even though you can't articulate why? These contextual inconsistencies are your warning system functioning correctly. Trust it. The third warning pattern is progressive isolation, where circumstances seem to systematically eliminate your options for help or escape. Your intended route is blocked, forcing a detour into more isolated areas. Alternative routes you consider somehow become inaccessible or blocked. The locations where you might seek help, gas stations or other facilities, are closed or absent when you expect them to be present. Your communications fail at the exact moment you try to contact help. This progressive isolation, where option after option is eliminated, suggests either deliberate engineering by human predators who have prepared the environment or some kind of targeting by phenomena that seems to create circumstances that trap victims. The key recognition factor is the feeling of being herded or channeled toward increasingly worse situations. If you find yourself making a series of forced choices that keep pushing you into more isolated or disadvantageous circumstances, break the pattern immediately. Turn around even if it adds hours to your journey. Stop at the last populated area even if you don't technically need to. Make a wrong turn deliberately to test whether the circumstances adjust to rechannel you. Your safety is infinitely more important than reaching your destination on schedule. The fourth warning pattern is anomalous behavior from other people that doesn't match normal social scripts. The person flagging you down who doesn't show appropriate relief when you slow down or stop. The stranded motorist whose body language doesn't match genuine distress. People who seem to be performing the role of victim or person in need rather than genuinely being in those states. Groups of people in locations where their presence makes no sense given the isolation and lack of visible vehicles. People whose appearance or condition seems inconsistent with their supposed situation, like someone claiming to need help, but showing no signs of having walked any distance. Humans are remarkably good at unconsciously recognizing when social behavior is slightly off, when someone is performing rather than genuinely experiencing an emotion, when body language doesn't match verbal content. This recognition happens below conscious awareness, which is why you'll often feel that something is wrong without being able to articulate what specifically is triggering that feeling. Trust that unconscious recognition system. It evolved over millions of years to detect predatory threats and deceptive behavior. When something about a person's behavior feels wrong, even subtly, even when you can't explain it, that feeling is valuable information. The fifth warning pattern is environmental responses that seem coordinated with the presence of unusual phenomena or potential threats. Animals behaving abnormally, showing fear or fleeing from areas adjacent to where unusual lights or presences are visible. Electronic systems failing or behaving erratically. Physical sensations like electromagnetic effects, static electricity, or feelings of being watched or monitored. Environmental sounds changing, with natural sounds like insects or wind dying away creating unnatural silence. These environmental responses, especially when they occur in correlation with other warning signs, suggest the presence of something genuinely unusual or threatening. Scientists understand that animals can detect environmental changes that humans can't perceive directly, like electromagnetic field variations, infrasound, or chemical signals. Their behavioral responses to these imperceptible stimuli can serve as early warning systems for humans if we're paying attention. Similarly, sensitive electronic equipment can detect electromagnetic interference or other environmental changes before they're strong enough to affect human senses. Treating environmental responses as valid warning signals rather than dismissing them as superstition or coincidence could provide critical early warning of developing threats. The sixth warning pattern, and this one is critical for recognizing human predators specifically, is the presence of coordination between multiple actors or elements. Multiple vehicles that seem to be working together to box you in or herd you toward specific locations. People who appear unconnected but whose actions seem synchronized. Obstacles or scenarios that appear in sequence, as if designed to channel you step by step into a trap. This coordination reveals sophisticated planning and preparation, indicating you're dealing with organized criminals rather than opportunistic threats. Understanding these recognition patterns creates a framework for threat assessment during roadside encounters. You're not trying to determine with certainty whether something is dangerous. You're looking for clusters of warning signs that suggest elevated risk. A single warning sign might be coincidence or misperception. But when multiple warning patterns appear together, when a vehicle is following you in sync while your electronics are behaving erratically, while the location is becoming more isolated while your gut instinct is screaming danger, that's not paranoia. That's accurate threat recognition that demands immediate defensive response. Part 5. Defensive STRATGIS and Survival RESPONSES. Now that we understand how roadside predation works, how encounters escalate, and how to recognize warning patterns, we need to discuss practical defensive strategies that maximize your probability of surviving dangerous roadside encounters. These strategies work against human predators and provide your best chance of escape even during encounters with unexplained phenomena. The first and most fundamental defensive strategy is maintaining vehicle mobility at all costs. Your vehicle is your protection, your weapon, and your escape mechanism simultaneously. As long as you're mobile, you have options. Once you're stopped or disabled, your options narrow dramatically. This means never stopping on isolated roads for obstacles, stranded motorists, or unusual phenomena unless absolutely unavoidable. If something is blocking the road, Assess whether you can drive around it safely, even if that means going partially off-road. Modern vehicles can handle far rougher terrain than most drivers realize. Minor vehicle damage is infinitely preferable to stopping in a location where you could be attacked. If a vehicle is following you, never pull over to let them pass unless you're in a populated area with witnesses and help available. Instead, vary your speed dramatically, make unexpected turns, take routes that legitimate traffic wouldn't take. If they continue following through these maneuvers, you've confirmed hostile intent and should be driving directly to a police station or other secure location while calling emergency services. Don't go home. Don't stop at convenient locations. Go directly to institutional help. The second defensive strategy is communication and position broadcasting. Always ensure someone knows your route and expected arrival time. Check in at scheduled intervals. Have standing protocols where failure to check in triggers help. Modern smartphones have features that broadcast your location continuously to designated contacts. Use them during any travel on isolated roads. If you encounter a threatening situation, call emergency services immediately while you're still mobile. Don't wait to see if the situation resolves. Give them your location, direction of travel, description of any vehicles or people involved, and keep the line open. The key principle is making yourself a high-risk target by ensuring that others know your location and situation. Predators avoid targets where intervention is likely, or where their actions are being documented and broadcast in real time. Even if immediate police response isn't possible due to remote location, knowing that your situation is documented and being tracked dramatically changes the risk calculation for any predator. The third defensive strategy is environmental awareness and tactical positioning. Always know where you are, what routes are available, where the nearest help is located, and what defensible positions exist if you need to stop. Park in ways that allow rapid exit without needing to reverse or maneuver. When stopping even at gas stations or rest areas, position your vehicle where you can see approaches and where you're visible to others. Leave yourself an out. Never allow your vehicle to be boxed in or trapped. For long drives on isolated roads, plan your route to include stops at populated areas even if you don't technically need them. These stops break up your predictability, allow you to verify you're not being followed, and reset your baseline for normal traffic. If something was tracking you, stopping at a populated area often causes them to break off rather than risk being seen and identified. The fourth defensive strategy is maintaining defensive readiness and situational awareness. This doesn't mean driving in a constant state of fear. It means maintaining appropriate vigilance based on risk level. On isolated roads at night, that vigilance should be high. Check mirrors frequently to identify following vehicles early. Notice environmental details that could indicate threats. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even slightly. Keep your vehicle in good mechanical condition, because breakdowns on isolated roads create vulnerability. Maintain adequate fuel so you're never forced to stop in disadvantageous locations. Have emergency supplies including water, flashlight, basic tools, and charged backup battery for your phone. Have deterrent items legally available, whether that's pepper spray where legal or simply tools that could serve defensive purposes if needed. The fifth defensive strategy is decisive action over hesitation. When you recognize a threat pattern, act immediately. Don't wait to gather more information. Don't rationalize or talk yourself out of your concern. Don't worry about seeming paranoid or rude. If a vehicle is following you, drive to police or populated area immediately. If your electronics are failing during an unusual encounter, treat it as an emergency and take whatever action maximizes your safety, even if that means abandoning your vehicle and hiding. If someone is approaching your stopped vehicle in a threatening manner, leave immediately even if it means minor accident damage to their vehicle or yours. The psychological barrier to decisive action is often social conditioning about being polite, about not overreacting, about not wanting to cause a scene. Every single violent crime and predatory attack requires the victim to either not recognize the threat or to hesitate in responding to it. Predators rely on this hesitation. They position themselves so that the defensive action required will feel socially awkward or like an overreaction. Someone standing near your car isn't attacking you. Driving away while they're close might seem rude or paranoid. But that split second of hesitation about social appropriateness is the window predators exploit. Your survival instinct doesn't care about social norms. When it's screaming danger, listen to it. Decisive, immediate action provides the highest probability of escaping dangerous situations before they progress to violence. You can apologize later for overreacting if you were wrong. You can't apologize for underreacting if you were right because you won't get the chance. The final defensive strategy is psychological resilience and refusal to comply with intimidation. If, despite all defensive measures, you find yourself in a situation where a predator is attempting to gain control through intimidation or force, your psychological state becomes a factor in outcome. Predators rely on victims freezing, complying, becoming passive. Maintaining aggressive defensive mindset, even when terrified, increases your survival probability dramatically. This doesn't necessarily mean physical fighting, though that may be required. It means refusing to accept the predator's framing of the situation, refusing to believe that compliance ensures safety, refusing to give up on escape opportunities. Many survivors of violent encounters report that at some point they made a conscious decision to fight and survive regardless of the cost, and that psychological shift changed the dynamic of the encounter. Predators are selecting for easy targets. When you demonstrate you're not easy, that changes everything. We've spent the last hour exploring the dark reality of what can happen on isolated roads. The human predators who use sophisticated tactics to identify and trap vulnerable drivers. The escalation patterns that turn ambiguous situations into life-threatening emergencies. The impossible circumstances that suggest phenomena beyond our current understanding. And most importantly, the recognition patterns and defensive strategies that can keep you safe. The essential truth is this: most drivers will never experience a dangerous roadside encounter. Statistical reality is that even isolated roads are relatively safe, and truly dangerous situations are rare. But for those who do encounter these threats, understanding the psychology, recognizing the patterns, and responding decisively can mean the difference between survival and becoming another unsolved mystery. Every story we examine today followed similar patterns. Isolation created opportunity. Engineered scenarios created vulnerability. Gradual escalation provided windows for escape that weren't recognized or weren't used. Hesitation and rationalization delayed defensive action until options were limited. These are the patterns that predators, whether human or otherwise, rely on. Breaking these patterns through awareness and decisive action is your most powerful defensive tool. The next time you're driving alone at night on an isolated road, remember what we've discussed. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Maintain mobility at all costs. Communicate your position and situation to others. Act decisively when you recognize threat patterns. And never, ever stop for obstacles or scenarios that create vulnerability in locations where help